Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourself. You are about to enter a world of ideas and scary shit that is our minds. You are entering the Writers Mindscape.
Prepare to be mine. You know what? That joke is not going to work.
We're working on it.
Okay.
We're working on the slogan.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Writers Mindscape episode 2.
Yes.
You are listening to the #1 writing podcast on the 01 podcast group. It's the only one, but
it's the only one.
But still, #1.
It's number 1.
Last episode, we talked about ourselves, our experience in writing, stuff like that, as well as starting about how to go about building an open world, more specifically on world building starts.
Yeah.
We'll be doing more about open worlds in the next 2 episodes.
Eventually.
Yep. So we're going to actually be expanding on the world building this episode.
Right.
So last time we talked about there's 2 methods. There's really not 2 methods. There's
a billion methods.
Yeah, but the 2 basic main ways are to do it all at once.
Yep.
The token method.
You've written out your history. You understand every major player in your world, and then you write stories within it.
Yep. Brandon Sanderson is a very current model of this. He has his Cosmere, where he has many worlds fully fleshed out. He knows the stories he's going to be telling in those worlds, and he probably has other short stories he'll probably tell in those based on the rules. So it's really kind of cool. It's a cool method. It's a hard method.
Yes, it is.
And then you have the most common advice for world building for new writers is to build it story by story. Flesh your world out as you need for the story. The method, I will constantly say, and you'll hear me say it all the time, I hate this method, and I hate it so much that I follow it.
Yes.
Because, I'm expanding on a huge world, and my worlds are huge.
Yep.
I know the story I'm going to be telling, for the most part, so I can expand on a more advanced level, where you write a book, that's the story. That's the kind of method, is you write it story by story. I do series. I know the series. I know what I need in the series, and I expand on so much that there's actually new elements that I can. There's enough there to do other stories.
Cool.
Which is cool. So it's kind of, I still get the same level, but it is based story based. I can't lie on that, and it drives me freaking nuts. I do have a few worlds that are created, not fully fleshed out, but there's a good portion of them fleshed out, and there's no story in them.
Oh, okay.
So, which is hard.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with how to expand your world.
So you've gotten your first story written.
Yeah. So we're going to start with the simple method.
Yeah. You've got that first story written. Now you want to write more in that world.
Yeah. So there's an option. There's 2 really options.
There's option A,
which is write a sequel.
Write a sequel.
It doesn't have to be a sequel to the exact, like, this is book 2 in a series. No,
not necessarily.
Generally, it means the same characters are there. It doesn't mean it's the same bad guy, same elements.
No. I mean, you could just.
It's just the next book with these characters.
Yeah, I mean, you can go, hey, I really enjoyed this character.
Yep.
I'm going to write the next story that they're telling me.
Yep. And so that's the next step. That's how, again, most authors will tell you to go about it. And what you do is, you basically do what you did the last time. You find your story, you see how it affects the world, and you flesh it out.
Yes.
The only difference this time is you had the first book. So unless something world changing where it completely basically rewrote the rules of your world, don't recommend that.
Yeah, don't. Just no.
No.
That's not a good way to end your first book.
No, that's something you do in 20 books down the line.
Sometimes book 3 or 4.
Yeah, depending on how big the book is. If you're writing an epic fantasy, yeah, you can get away with it.
Yeah.
You can get away after the second one if you do the story right. If you do it can work in a first book. It really comes down to how you go about doing it, and is it interesting and engaging story.
Right.
Just not that I wouldn't do that because it's something you build towards in my mind.
I mean, then you have your option B.
Yes.
Which is writing a story that takes place in the same world but doesn't directly have a connection to your original story.
So this is I would say frowned upon if you're going to traditional, if you want to go traditional publishing.
Yes.
Which we're not getting into publishing in this podcast for a very long time.
No.
I can tell you that for a fact. But traditional publishers was like, no, we want a sequel to this one.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, because in their job is to sell the book to an audience. And selling a book that isn't connected to your last book that's set in the same world is very difficult to explain to an audience.
Yes. So, but the world publishing is changing. It can be done. If your first book sells a lot of copies, they'll probably say whatever you want to do next.
Yeah.
Oh, this is in the same world, just not tied to it. Okay, because if you sold a lot of copies, they'll make the effort to make sure people know.
Right.
Because you're making money for them.
At that point, it'll be the author of such and such book.
Yes. But it's not really recommended because it is so hard. Because unless you tell people on your website, in your marketing, and conversations that this is not a sequel to the first book, but it is in the same world, people are going to be buying it based on it thinking it's a sequel.
Oh, yeah.
And you're going to be very disappointed.
Well, I mean, you go and look at Stephen King's plethora of novels.
Yes.
Most of them take place in the same worlds. But they were never marketed that way.
Yeah. I've always took Stephen King's as a multiverse.
Well, it is too.
Partly because of the Dark Tower series.
Yes, the Dark Tower series is the Lynch to the multiverse that he has created.
Yep.
While stories like Salem's Lot, Pet Sematary, and and The Dark Half all take place in the same area.
Isn't Carrie in there too?
I think Carrie is...
No.
Carrie and Cujo are in another... shared universe
Okay.
And by the way, our reality is also included into this multiverse as well, book 6 of the Dark Tower series. Thank you very much.
Which also means Harry Potter world. Basically, every world, whether he wrote it or not, basically exists. Can technically be connected in a sense.
In some way.
But so if you're going to do Part B,
yes,
just make sure you have to make sure people know. And now,
or you go out of your way to make sure that no one knows.
Yes, it's possible.
I mean, you can straight up be like, "There's no connection between these movies. between these stories, other than so and so is president, or so and so is the governor," and it's just like that's it.
Now, if you want to be one of those writers, like which I am, you write a story that takes place in a world you've already written in, and you just leave clues that tell them it's in that world, but you don't actually come out outright.
What? Easter eggs?
Yes, Easter eggs.
Those are fun to throw in.
Yes, they are. Can help, but it's not generally recommended to do in your first few books, because remember, first off, the fact that if you write a book, that first book probably won't ever see the light of day.
Probably not,
unless you're that skilled.
Good for you.
If you're that skilled, I hate you.
I don't. I say good for you. And tell me what your book is.
I say good for you and let me know what your book is, but at the same time, I'm jealous and hate you of your skill. Because I've been writing for 18 years and I'm still trying to get my debut novel out there.
All right.
But generally, your first book is crap. Even if you edit it, it's still generally not good.
There will be somebody out there who will go, "Why did you make me read this?
Yes.
I've wasted time. I hate you."
But also part of it is when now it's easier to find editors and stuff like that can help you build and work off that belt.
Oh yeah.
So your first novel can actually be more likely now. In the past, it wasn't.
No.
You wrote your first book, it was trashed. You were learning. It was a learning experience.
Sometimes it would be published years later.
Right. Because you're a better writer, you basically started from scratch.
Yeah.
And rewrote it. So that's two methods. But just remember, as you are building this world, story by story, whether they're directly connected by a sequel or a separate part, the rules have to work.
Yes, your first story needs to set your rules.
Yes.
Your second story is expanding upon those rules.
Brandon Sanderson, I've already talked about in the first one, but is known as the magic system guy. He loves magic systems. And as he says, one of his earlier works, which is in a massive revamping, and he will write and tell later, is he said it's all you can. If you read one of the manuscripts, it's all about the magic system. You can just tell it's like he was so focused on that. It's like it was bad.
Oh,
Not that the magic wasn't cool or anything. It's just like it was too much focus on that. He eventually came up with his own rules of a magic system, how to create a good magic system. I am not really sure on which rule it is. I think it's number 2, but it could be number 3. Basically, the rule states this, and this applies to everything else. Storytelling, your world building, magic systems, you name it, it applies to everything. Add depth before adding something new. Basically, instead of expanding out into some new areas that you, here.
Yeah,
how about you take something and expand on that?
I mean, the downfall is, just using, going from a single story and building from there is, the new can be a new setting.
Yes.
And unless you've really fleshed out your previous setting and you plan on really fleshing out and making it seem organic and living, that something lives there, you end up having flat 2D environments.
That's why I like one thing because my biggest complaint about starting with your story world with the story.
Yeah.
They just come off, a lot of times they just come off as, oh, there's nothing outside this world. You write a sequel, I'm probably not going to believe it. Because you may do a good job of fleshing it out, but I'm gonna be looking for the errors. I'm gonna be looking for where it didn't flesh out. And this is also something that I know this.
Oh, okay.
Because I gotta know this. Because if I don't know it, and you do a really good job, I probably won't know it.
Right.
But if I'm reading your sequel and I'm like, oh, this doesn't really match up with this. Oh, it's another. Okay, you basically wrote this sequel and you're fleshing it out, and you didn't do your due diligence.
You didn't do your homework.
Yeah.
Regarding where you started.
Everything needs to work together. Now, here's the thing. Again, just because you know it doesn't mean we have to know it.
No.
It's part of that. Like, there will be so much stuff, part of your world and your story, like backgrounds, histories for all your characters, that will never make it into your books.
No, but you can hint at them.
You can hint at that. That's why one of the things I do say, if you do this method, if your story takes place in a town, throw some Easter eggs out there to other cities or events that may be going on that you may never ever touch upon.
Well, there's that, and the history of the town.
Yes.
It's like, 30 years ago, this event happened here.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be big or anything, but it can be like, a moose ran through town.
Yep.
And then in another story later on, you're just like, you actually reference. It's like, my grandfather saw a moose that ran through that town.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's a connection.
There's connection. There's continuity. But like throwing these little Easter eggs out, like stories, backgrounds, making it seem like, there is depth before this story took place.
Yeah.
There'll be stuff after this place takes place. And that's why I don't like this method, because new writers, and there are some experienced writers, don't really do this really well.
No.
So that's why I don't like the method. I prefer the other method. So we're going to transition into that second method. So you've written a world from scratch. It's already done. Everything's already done.
Yeah, you know everything about this world.
Yep. But now you're writing book 2. Either it's a sequel or a standalone, same method. Is it going to be a sequel or is it a different area?
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that? Same thing. It's very similar. It's just now you don't have to do the homework of how these things intermingle or work together. You know this already.
Yeah.
You're good. You want to refresh yourself on this stuff because if it's a very detailed world, you're going to miss details. You got to make sure.
Yeah.
You can do that later. I recommend Brandon Sanderson's method. He actually has continuity writers, editors. People who are part of his circle.
Who are just like, wait, that's not going to work because this is already going on during this.
Yeah, once he writes the book, he hands it off to the keeper of the Cosmere.
Oh, okay.
Who know they know more probably about the information that's been revealed than we do already.
Well, yeah.
Or they just know what's happened, but they know it really well. They comb the book to see. Is he saying something? We haven't revealed this yet.
Yeah.
You have to go back and add this in, or if you're going to keep it, and help him out that way.
Why are we referencing this thing that's happening?
Yeah.
We haven't said that that's happening anyplace else yet.
Yeah, you haven't brought this up, so but you're acting the way it's written now. It seems like they should know.
It's already common knowledge.
Yeah, so
it's like, well, yes, because in this next story, I'll be revealing it. Technically, that next story takes place before this story, and you're like, okay, well, then we'll just continue on with this.
Well, and then also you can say, like, but fix it so it's not direct, so upfront.
Yes.
Like a kick in the face, like, whoa, I'm missing something. That can come later at the end of the book, just not the beginning or something like that. And we'll talk about stuff like plotting and pacing and stuff like it reveals at some point. But this is more about revealing overall. You gotta know what you want to reveal out of this world and stick to it.
Yes.
The rules of how the stuff you're going to be revealing or expanding it or adding depth to, you got to know them. Make sure you hit them. Make sure the reader understands them. Now, here's the thing. How well they understand them is up to you.
That's purely down to how well you're explaining your situation, the story situation.
And where in the story you are also. Right. Because if you want them to know about something, but not really understand it, that's a choice. Because they're eventually going to understand it by the end. That's great.
Hopefully.
Or you don't want them to understand it because you want the reveal to become later on. In a story that you may not even know the story, but you know you're going to reveal it in a different story.
Right.
It's one of those things where it all comes down to presentation and writing and how you reveal things. You can have the most beautiful world, like Middle Earth. But if you reveal things and tell things in the worst way possible, no one's gonna stick around for book 3 if they stuck around if they liked book 1.
Yeah.
They'd be like, whoa, nope, I don't believe you. I don't think this works at all in any way, shape, or form. You may think you understand it. I'm gone. And you lost readers. So it's really based on how you present the information, and no info dumps.
Yeah, that's just not... I mean, every once in a while it works, but
you have to do it in a way that's creative and engaging.
I mean, one of the better ways of doing an info dump is exposition. You literally have a character that doesn't understand, and you have one character that does, and you have the character that does explain it to the character that doesn't. AKA
Harry Potter.
I mean, another one for me was actually the Dark Tower series, with like Eddie and Roland, where Eddie's just like, I don't understand any of this world, and Roland's like, sit with me and I shall tell you my ways.
Yeah.
I shall show you the way.
So it's one of those things where you can find ways, but you have to do it engaging. You have to do it well.
Yeah.
You can still have mystery, because if he's going to explain everything that's about to happen, but you don't want them to the reader to know everything's about to happen.
No.
Well, the character needs to know how everything happens, but the reader doesn't. That's tricky. That's more an advanced thing. But mostly, just have an incident happen that cuts off the dialogue that's revealing it, and then that we can come back to it later. Stuff like, use your imagination. If you're writing a book, you should be creative.
I mean, one of my favorite ways of doing exposition and doing it in such a manner that ends up being kind of funny was it was an episode of Doctor Who, where somebody asked, they were like, well, what are the Daleks? And they're like, bad people. And they're like, okay. And that was it. It was like, that's all you needed to know. They're the bad guys.
All you need
Done.
Yeah.
We don't need to fully explain these characters.
We don't need to explain the whole back history of these characters. No, they're bad. Okay.
All right, moving on.
So, it really comes down, you're doing the same thing for both. It's just, one, you're creating it for the part of the story, and the other one's already created, and you're revealing it in snippets, and it's all about presentation.
Yes.
But it takes practice. You'll come back, if you're a writer and you write multiple books, you're going to come back to your first books and you're like, God, that's terrible.
Oh, God, all the time.
You expanded, you've gotten better.
As somebody who dabbles in writing, I have gone back and read some of my stuff. Even some of my, like, just straight up idea pages.
Yep.
And I've been like, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah.
Oh, I looked at the date. Oh, yeah, I was 14 at the time. Nope, totally understand now.
Yeah, I've heard some of my stuff from high school. Oh my god.
6th grade. It is some 2D storytelling.
Yeah, mine from high school, it's telling. It's not storytelling, it's just telling. No showing, telling.
Yeah.
And dialogue. That's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, that's everything we got for this week. Feel free to subscribe to the channel, smash that notifications button, and comment down what you thought about this. Your thoughts on world building, how to reveal new elements, creating them as you go, or revealing what you've already created.
Oh, and just wait, we will get into actually creating our own world eventually.
Yes. That's a good point. After we hit these next few topics, we actually want to build our own world, which will be an open world where anyone can write a story in. And we'll have guidelines on how that goes about, but we'll get to that eventually.
Exactly.
All right. Have a good night.
See ya.